Shabbat Shalom. I believe that Judaism speaks to us in each and every generation, and I believe that Judaism has wisdom for us on each and every topic that we confront. As such, I believe that Congregation Shaarey Zedek is and ought to be a place where Judaism confronts real life. This is our sacred home, and Judaism must speak to our real lives as Jews in the 21st century. So as such, I believe that it's not only a good thing, but a mitzvah, an obligation for us as a sacred family to speak about difficult contemporary issues. 2 weeks ago, I spoke about annexation in Israel, and I tried to offer a framework by which to see that as a Jew, a Jewish framework. And I want to thank the people who wrote me, certainly who said, "Great sermon, Rabbi." But I also want to thank the people who wrote and said, "Rabbi, perhaps you didn't think about this." And that gave me an opportunity to learn, that challenged my thinking. And I especially want to say thank you for those emails because they were written respectfully and with compassion and in a true and genuine desire for an exchange of ideas. I want to continue down that path today because Judaism does speak to our real lives. And at Congregation Shaarey Zedek, we are a place where Judaism is for real life. This past week, many of us heard that Bari Weiss resigned from the New York Times. And in many ways, she blamed this notion of cancel culture for her resignation. Bari Weiss, a pro-Israel advocate and someone who may at times speak to a more conservative, lowercase c, conservative nature, left the New York Times because she felt like her voice was not given ample respect. At times, she was called a Nazi for her opinions, of all things, to be pro-Israel and called a Nazi. And because she offered views that may have differed from where the New York Times generally leaned, she felt like her voice was being muted. She felt like the culture was trying to cancel her out. And I was thinking about that this week because at the same time that we read about Bari Weiss's resignation from the New York Times, the Dixie Chicks dropped a new album. I know that you're as excited for that as I am, because who doesn't love the Dixie Chicks? Now, some of you are looking at me. The Dixie Chicks are a country band. I'll give you a little hint. They no longer go by Dixie Chicks. They now go by Chicks. And every now and again, your rabbi enjoys a good country music song, and I like the Dixie Chicks. And if you remember back to 2003, the Dixie Chicks at a concert in Europe spoke out against the Second Iraq War and particularly President George W. Bush. And as a result, there was a massive attack against the Dixie Chicks for their outspokenness against the war. And people really tried to eliminate Dixie Chick music from radio station and take the Dixie Chicks off the map. That is another example of what we now call cancel culture. In fact, I was thinking as I was preparing for my remarks today that I hope you don't cancel culture me out because I use the word chicks in a sermon. I'm telling you it's the name of the band. I'm not being derogatory. They call themselves the Chicks. All right. This cancel culture is a phenomenon that has been on us for a while. We know several years ago that Colin Kaepernick took a knee during the Star Spangled Banner, and that was the end of his NFL career. We also know that today the Washington Redskins are changing the name of their football team out of respect for Native Americans and because of how disrespectful the word Redskins is to Native Americans. We are in the midst of this cancel culture, right? What is cancel culture? Cancel culture is a practice of withdrawing support, canceling, for public figures or companies after they've done something or said something considered objectionable or offensive. In many times today, that might be something that is considered racist or sexist or disparaging against another minority group, LGBTQ, immigrants, indigenous peoples, people with disabilities, etc. But this phenomenon has been going on for a long time. This notion of cancel culture has existed for many, many years against anything or anyone with whom we disagree. However, cancel culture has been amplified by the effects of social media and its power to carry an opinion, no matter how radical it is. We are in a period where we try to tear down those that represent something that stands against us. We might try to tear them down by using an insulting name against them on Twitter, or we might try to tear them down by literally going to a statue and pulling it off of its mantle. This notion of tearing down idols, tearing down statues, tearing down people, tearing down companies is how we try in today's world to effectively mute debate by literally tearing down that which may stand in opposition to whatever we believe. This idea of cancel culture, as I've said, is not new. It exists today. It existed 10 years ago. It existed 20 years ago. And I want to tell you, based on our Torah portion, that cancel culture has existed for thousands of years. As we turn to our double Torah portion this week that brings the book of Numbers to a conclusion, Parshat Matot Maseh, we see another example of cancel culture. Because here the Israelites went to war against the Midianites. Now you may remember from the Torah readings the last couple of weeks, the Midianites realized they could not defeat the Israelites militarily as the Israelites passed through on their way to the Promised Land. So what did the Midianites do? The Midianites sent their women out against the Israelites to try to seduce them with their bodies in order to lure the Israelites away from their faith. The Midianite women tried to seduce the Israelite men to lure them away from their faith. So as the Israelites waged war in our Torah portion against Midian, they killed many of the Midianite men. And they came back to Moshe Rabbeinu, they came back to Moses with the women as their captives, along with the children and the spoils of war. What did Moshe Rabbeinu say? Not something so PC for us today as 21st century Jews. Moses said, it's not enough that you killed the Midianite men. You have to kill the Midianite women too, because they're the ones that try to lure us away. They're the ones that try to lead us into idolatry. In so many opportunities, in so many ways, in so many instances, our Torah says idolatry is so bad. It's not just enough to preach against it. You quite literally have to destroy the idols. And it's not just enough to destroy the idols, you have to destroy the people who worship idols, lest we be lured away. Is that not an example of cancel culture? Idolatry is so bad that we have to not only tear down the statues that represent the idols, but we have to tear down the people who practice idolatry, lest they lure us away. That is in many ways how our Tanakh, how our Hebrew Bible, handled idolatry, the great sin, that which most clearly stood as antithetical to Judaism and as a threat to the Jewish people. But as time goes on and as idolatry fades away as a process of history, Judaism changes. And as we come to the rabbinic period, we leave the biblical period, we come to the rabbinic period, we have a totally different way of dealing with those who stand against us. We have a totally different way of those who think differently with us. Sure, the majority may feel one way, as our Talmud represents, and our Talmud brings forward an argument, but the Talmud always records the minority opinion. Even when the majority disagrees with the minority, the Talmud, as a matter of rule, records the minority opinion. And at times, the Talmud will even come to say that two opinions can hold equal truth. And in those moments, our Talmud tells us, Elu va'elu divrei Elohim chayim. Both this and this are the words of the living God. That maybe at sometimes not all of us are in possession with all the truth, but that there might be partial truths to two different arguments. My teacher at the Shalom Hartman Institute, Micha Goodman, calls what the rabbis practice cognitive empathy. Cognitive empathy. That is to say, they recognize that their opponent's view might have some legitimacy. Could you imagine how radical that is? Think about today, whether on Washington, D.C., in the papers of the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, or even in our engagements on Facebook. We actually said that someone who disagreed with us had some merit to their argument. That's called cognitive empathy. That's what our rabbis strive to show us, to demonstrate for us, is the ideal way of life. We stand with our opinion and we stand firm in what we believe to be true and correct, but we honor that there may be truth in what our opponents are saying. So what do we do in this cancel culture of ours? What statues deserve tearing down? And which words deserve to be recorded as a minority opinion, albeit one that we disagree with? How do we know the difference? And here's where I want to make some suggestions. Personally, I think that Civil War statues deserve to be torn down. Just as I would not want to see a statue of Adolf Hitler up anywhere, nor would I want to drive on a Goebbels highway, I think any reference to Civil War leaders from the South should be removed. These are people who were insurrectionists against the United States of America, and they were ardent proponents of slavery. I don't think that they should be celebrated. Their statues should come down. Revolutionary War heroes, however, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, I don't believe that they fall into the same category of tear down. I think that we should recognize their sins, but still celebrate their accomplishments. How does one fall into one category and another fall into another category? I don't know that there's a clear line to draw. I'm not sure that I could articulate the total difference. But in my gut, in my kishkas, I feel like they're different situations. So how do we move forward? And as I was thinking about this and wrestling with this, what I'm going to advocate is that maybe we should put an end to the practice of building statues. Because the moment you build a statue of a human being, you concretize everything for which they stand as righteous. The moment you build a statue to a human being, you concretize everything for which they stand as righteous. And I don't know about you, but I know about me, and I am not perfect. I make mistakes. I might even be making a mistake right now with the words I'm uttering in this sermon. But what I hope that will be remembered about me when I'm long gone, may it not be till 120, is the sum total of the words that I offered, as well as my righteous actions. And so I hope when my time comes, may it not be till 120, if anyone is going to celebrate me, that they celebrate my words and not my total personage. I think we as a country, we as a people, shouldn't build idols of anyone. We shouldn't build statues to anyone, but we should celebrate people's words and their actions, recording the words for all time, celebrating the words, even when we disagree with them. That's very Jewish. There was another example recently of our cancel culture about to take shape. Many of you read along with me about the words of Desean Jackson, right? Desean Jackson, a football player for the Philadelphia Eagles, posted a screenshot of a passage on social media, falsely attributed to Adolf Hitler, declaring that white Jews will blackmail America, that we, will extort America, and that their plan for world domination won't work if people figure out who they are. And he went on to say that the African Americans are the real children of Israel. Now, that in many ways could have been something that was cancel cultured out. Perhaps like other public figures, Desean Jackson should have been fired. Perhaps like other public figures, Desean Jackson should have been made an example of and all of his media endorsements canceled. But that's not what happened. And I'd like to tell you that I believe I'm glad that it didn't happen. I'm glad that Desean Jackson wasn't fired. Because what happened next is that people came forward to volunteer to say, not only, but this is wrong, but let me educate you as to why. Julian Endelman, a Jew from the New England Patriots, came forward and said, Desean Jackson, I'll take you to the U.S. Holocaust Museum, and you take me to the African American Museum. Let us educate each other. Think of how powerful that is. Rather than tearing down an individual for stupid words, rather than tear him down, we use it as an opportunity to educate. We recorded the words, and then we said, here's why we think they're wrong. We engaged in conversation and discussion and debate, because that's what we Jews do. We discuss, we debate, we wrestle, we educate others, and even more than that, we use an opportunity of those who disagree with us to educate ourselves. That is the opposite of cancel culture. We try to educate ourselves, and we try to educate others. As we go forward this week and into the coming weeks, let us be mindful of those idols which truly need to be torn down. And indeed, there are some idols which need tearing down. But let us remember that the majority of that which stands in opposition to our beliefs don't necessarily need to be cancel cultured, but need to be educated about, need to be spoken about, so their mistruths can be brought to light. Let us stop using social media to call out the entirety of individuals, but rather just the words that they use and the choices of how they behave. And let us stop with social media and elsewhere taking our opponents and trying to call them names in order to belittle what they stand for. It's beneath us, certainly, as Jews, and frankly, I believe that it's beneath us as Americans. May God bless us as we go forward in these coming weeks and months. May God allow us to truly pursue that which is right and that which is righteous. And may God bless us with the wisdom to know when to tear down, and most importantly, when to build up. Shabbat Shalom.